Hey, sexy people. I recently watched a 2-hour podcast where infidelity was framed as a pathway to truth, power dynamics were repackaged as divine downloads, and a closed triad was labeled radical monogamy. As an ethical non-monogamy coach, I'm here to clear up the confusion before someone takes this as gospel. Hi, I'm Taylor Sparks, ethical non-monogamy coach, author of an African-American Guide to Ethical Non-Monogamy, and founder of OrganicLoving.com. Now, normally I don't wade into these kinds of waters, but after listening to a recent podcast episode featuring Aubrey Marcus, his wife, his girlfriend, and their spiritual teacher, I knew I had to say something. They've coined the term radical monogamy to describe their current triad structure. And I'm not here to drag anyone for their lifestyle, but I am here to set the record straight because this episode wrapped a whole lot of emotional bypassing and spiritual manipulation in mystic language and called it evolution. Let's talk about it, shall we? Infidelity is not ethical non-monogamy. In about the first 10 minutes of the podcast, they framed infidelity, yes, lying, cheating, deception, as a common and almost expected gateway to non-monogamy. But let me stop you right there. Infidelity is not ethical non-monogamy. Ethical non-monogamy is not what happens after you get caught. It's what happens when two or more adults have the maturity and integrity to tell the truth, make agreements, and explore with respect. Most people who do well in ethical non-monogamy didn't get there by sneaking around. They arrived at it by choice, not by crisis. They built it from a foundation of trust, not betrayal. And they sure as hell didn't rebrand cheating as spiritual awakening. So let's talk about spiritual coercion. Later in the episode, Aubrey shares that he received a message from God telling him to bring a new, much younger woman into his relationship dynamic and impregnate them both, while his wife, by her own admission, deeply craved monogamy and emotional safety. Now listen, I'm no stranger to spiritual practice, but when your divine downloads start requiring someone else to sacrifice their boundaries, we are no longer in the realm of sacred truth. We're in the realm of spiritual coercion. When one partner says, "This is what I need to feel safe," and the other replies, "But Spirit told me to do otherwise," that's not compromise. That's emotional manipulation. And let me be clear, true ethical non-monogamy requires enthusiastic, informed consent, not mystical mandates. Then we have compromise versus self-abandonment. Another theme that kept coming up in the conversation was sacrifice. They romanticize the idea of dying to yourself, of shedding your needs and your identity to make someone else's vision of love work. Here's the thing. Yes, compromise is part of any relationship, but compromise, it means we're both adjusting, not just one person constantly bleeding for the other's freedom. Sacrifice without reciprocity is not growth, it's self-abandonment. Too many people, especially women, we get talked into this idea that real love means losing yourself, giving up your desires, and swallowing your discomfort as proof of your evolution. Let me say this as plainly as I can. You should not, never, ever have to break yourself to keep someone else whole. And let's call it what it is. Polyfidelity now. Let's talk labels, right? They're calling their relationship radical monogamy. But what they're actually describing is polyfidelity, a closed triad committed to each other and no one else. That's not monogamy. That's just a version of polyamory with spiritual branding and PR-friendly packaging. And look, I get it. Polyamory can still be scary, can be a scary word for some folks. But calling something monogamy when it clearly isn't, that just confuses people and it misleads the public. If we want people to truly understand the spectrum of relationships, ethical non-monogamy, swinging, open marriages, polyamory, polyfidelity, relationship anarchy, we have to be willing to name things honestly. There is no shame in saying we're in a closed poly triad, but calling it monogamy with a twist, that's just branding. Now, there's one more thing we need to talk about, and it's subtle, but it's critical. Representation matters. When white, hetero-passing spiritual influencers present themselves as the pioneers of expanded or radical relationship models, they erase the deep community roots that already exist. Let's be clear, BIPOC, LGBTQ+, and non-Western cultures have been practicing non-monogamy in various forms for generations. We didn't always call it polyamory or ethical non-monogamy, but chosen family, communal parenting, shared resources, same-sex unions, and fluid partnership structures, that's not new. But when certain voices dominate the conversation, especially with shiny spiritual branding, it frames alternative love as something discovered or downloaded. That's not discovery, that's erasure. And if you want to practice radical love, start by recognizing who's already been loving radically long before it was podcast worthy. What real ethical non-monogamy requires? Well, if you're watching this and you're wondering what ethical non-monogamy really looks like, let me tell you. It looks like ongoing, honest conversations, even when it's hard. Making decisions based on mutual consent, not emotional pressure. Saying yes to relationships that expand you, not ones that leave you anxious or unsafe. And understanding that love without clarity isn't love, it's confusion. It also means respecting your partner's limits, not steamrolling them with spiritual superiority. You can love someone deeply and still need boundaries. You can be open-hearted without being wide open to everything. And some final thoughts. At the end of the day, I'm not here to tell Aubrey or anyone else how to live, but I am here to speak to the people watching who are trying to navigate ethical non-monogamy for real, for yourself, your relationship, or your healing. If this podcast, their podcast, confused you, made you doubt your gut, or left you wondering if you have to give everything up to explore more love, you don't. Healthy, ethical, non-monogamous relationships do exist. You can explore them without betrayal, without mysticism as manipulation, and without losing yourself and someone else's vision. If you want help doing that, I've got resources for you. My book and workbook of the same name, An African American Guide to Ethical Non-Monogamy. I also offer private coaching because sometimes you need a guide, not just good intentions. And you can find it all at organiclovin, LOVEN.com. Love should feel clear, consensual, and grounded. If you're burning yourself out trying to fit into someone else's mystical love story, it's time to write your own. Again, I'm Taylor Sparks, ethical non-monogamy coach and sex goddess, and thank you for watching. And until next time, your love, your rules, and your freedom. Bye.